Guten Abend, good evening, and welcome to the Outside Views Show USA, the show where we look at the United States from the safe, socially distanced perspective of 4,000 miles away. I'm your host, and let me tell you, it has been a week. You know, being in Germany right now feels a bit like watching your neighbor's house through a telescope. Except the neighbor is currently trying to buy the telescope, the house, and the entire street, while simultaneously redecorating his backyard with a tank. It's January 2026. The air is cold, the beer is room temperature, and the American political landscape is, it's basically a Michael Bay movie directed by someone who accidentally took the wrong medication. Let's start with a big story. If you've been living under a rock, or perhaps under a windmill in Lower Saxony, you might have missed that President Trump recently decided that the Donroe Doctrine was a bit too subtle. He replaced it with the Donroe Doctrine, which basically states, if I can see it on a map, it's probably mine. Earlier this month, US forces conducted Operation Absolute Resolve and brought Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro to the States, and last week the fallout has been spectacular. On Thursday, Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado visited the White House, and she brought a gift. Not a box of chocolates, not a nice bottle of rum. No, she gave him her Nobel Peace Prize medal. Think about that. Giving Donald Trump a Nobel Peace Prize for a military extraction, that's like giving a shark a Vegan of the Year award because it ate a fisherman who was wearing a hemp shirt. And Machado called it a gesture of mutual respect. In Norway, the Nobel Committee reacted with a kind of silent, icy Scandinavian rage that usually results in a very sternly worded IKEA manual. They called it absurd. And Trump, meanwhile, probably checked if the metal was solid gold and if he could melt it down to make a V to the top of a skyscraper in Caracas or something. Because that's the plan, folks. Trump announced last week that the US is now running Venezuela. He said they are going to stay there until the oil infrastructure is fixed and the US taxpayers are reimbursed. It's the first time in history a country has been liberated and immediately handed a bill for the gas. Congratulations, you're free. Also, you owe us $400 billion. We take Amex, but we prefer crude. But wait, why stop at South America? If you're building an empire, you need a freezer. And last week, the president reignited his passion project, Greenland. He told a group of oil executives, who I assume were all vibrating with excitement, that anything less than US control of Greenland is unacceptable. He's now threatening Denmark and their allies with tariffs. Denmark! The people who gave us Lego and those butter cookies in the blue tins that only contain sewing kits. He called Greenland vital for security. Security from what? Sad polar bears? The terrifying threat of a surplus of ice? NATO members are so worried they've started deploying soldiers to Greenland. It's 2026 and we are on the verge of the Cold War II, actually cold this time. Our neighbors in Denmark must be wondering if they should start hiding the keys to the Faroe Islands under the mat. While the US is busy not regime-changing Venezuela and definitely not annexing Greenland, they're also looking at Iran. Tensions are through the roof, and the UN Security Council held an emergency meeting because the US is threatening to intervene in the protests there. The White House says the goal is strategic submission, which sounds like something you'd find in a very specific type of basement in Berlin. But in diplomacy, it just means do what we say or the sky turns into drones. But don't worry, the president is a man of peace. On Friday, he announced the Gaza Board of Peace. And you know, the guys with Tony Blair and Jared Kushner and the stuff. Tony Blair. Because when you want to bring peace to the Middle East, you definitely want the guy who helped start the Iraq War. It's like hiring the captain of the Titanic to teach a course on iceberg avoidance. And Trump called it the greatest and most prestigious board ever assembled. I haven't seen a lineup like that since the last time a group of villains met in a hollowed-out volcano. But now let's look inside the US, because if you think the foreign policy is chaotic, the domestic scene is basically a bar fight in a fireworks factory. In Minnesota, things are tense, and the Department of Justice is now investigating Governor Tim Walz and the mayor of Minneapolis. And why? For obstructing federal immigration crackdowns. ICE, the immigration agency, has been very busy. They had a fatal shooting in Minneapolis last week, and Governor Walz called it a campaign of organized brutality. And in response, the DOJ is basically saying, nice state you got there, Tim. Be a shame if someone investigated it for conspiracy. And Trump even threatened to use the Insurrection Act to stop protests in Minneapolis. And nothing says land of the free like using a law from 1807 to make sure people stop complaining about the federal government shooting people in their driveways. And meanwhile, at the actual border, well, one of the borders, the administration is halting visa processing for immigrants from 75 different countries. At this rate, the only way to get into America legally will be to buy a ticket to a MAGA rally and hope you get caught in the background of a C-SPAN shot or something. And what about the Democrats, the opposition? Well, the House passed a bill to fund the government, but the Senate is currently stuck in a loop. They're arguing over amendments like they are trying to decide on a pizza topping while the House is on fire. And the start of the year was really the greatest thing I ever heard. The first bill they were voting on this year was, I really don't dare to say it. It was on shower heads, on luxury shower heads. That's this new standard for everyone, as opposed in the bill. While they are talking about invading Greenland. And the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, has formally invited Trump to give his State of the Union on February 24th. And I'm guessing the State of the Union will be, I have it, all of it, even the parts that aren't technically the Union yet. Looking at you, Greenland. And the Democrats are pinning their hopes on the 2026 midterms, which Trump suggested this week should maybe be cancelled. Yeah. Cancel the elections because, as we all know, the best way to prove you're the leader of a democracy is to make sure nobody ever has to bother with that pesky voting thing again. It's so time-consuming. All those little stickers, the lines, the realization that your neighbors have very different ideas about reality than you do. So who needs that? So that was another week in the US, and America is currently a country that is seizing oil tankers, threatening to invade its own allies for their eyes, and giving Nobel Peace Prizes to people who didn't win them, while the president's AI chatbot is under fire for, and I'm not making this up, accidentally generating sexually explicit images of people who aren't wearing enough clothes. You know, here in Germany, we complain a lot. We complain that the trains are late. We complain that the bureaucracy is slow. We complain that there's too much foam on the beer. But looking at the last 7 days in the US, I think I'm okay with a late train. At least when the Deutsche Bahn is strategically submitting, it just means I'm sitting in a station in Hamm for 3 hours, not that they are trying to annex Switzerland for the chocolate reserves. Stay safe, America. And Greenland, if I were you, I'd start learning how to play baseball, just in case. And that's our show for tonight. And if you enjoyed this outside view, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments which country you think will be annexed next. My money is on Canada. They have too much maple syrup and not enough nukes. Good night and tschüss.